welcome to the 140k Imperial Guard Tactics video. Now before we get into today's video, I would like to say a huge thank you to Varney Wanlier for sending in some awesome pictures of his Imperial Guard diorama. These pictures and models are based on the 9th edition trailer where the Imperial Guard get zapped by some Necrons, and I have to say they look absolutely fantastic. Love that guy who's halfway through getting hit by a gauze flare. Nasty way to go. Absolutely fantastic models. Thank you for sending these in. If anyone else has got any cool pictures they want me to use in my videos, please post them on my Facebook page. There will be a link down in the description below. Now today guys, this video is going to be an after action report for the battle report that was released over the weekend, which was the Imperial Guard, the Morgan 50th Rifles versus the Drukhari Witch Cult. Now this was actually a rematch, and for me it was a very important one because the first game that I ever played of 9th edition, when I was totally relearning the edition and especially how the primary and secondary missions work and all that, was against this Dark Elder army, almost, pretty much like identical Dark Elder army. And I wanted to know whether the lessons that I had learned over the last few months, because I've got a few, got about half a dozen games under my belt now, if the lessons that I had learned had paid off. Now you guys know that I've been doing lots of videos about how to play primary, how to play secondary, and I've been really trying to hammer home this point of, you can play, you don't necessarily have to be aggressive. You can actually, go into the game with a pre-formulated plan. And as long as you stick to that plan, you've got a good shot, and you build your army and your tactics to that plan, whether it's to focus on primary or focus on secondary. And if you do that, you can come out victorious, which is something which is very different to previous editions, because a lot of previous editions were, they were cumulative, objectives were placed randomly, you didn't necessarily know what the deployment zone was going to be, so it was a lot harder to go into it with a plan. But in 9th edition, deployment zones are set, objectives are set, you can build your army to take a certain secondaries, you know what the primaries are every single time, so you can go in with a much bigger plan. And that's what I tried to do with that game over the weekend. So I'll run through the two armies just very quickly in case someone is coming to this video first. But I would say I highly recommend you go and watch the battle report, even if you just want to skip to the end to see what the end result is, because I will be talking about spoilers in this video. Now the two armies are obviously my Imperial Guard Pure Infantry army and my brother's Pure Dark Elder Witch Cult army. Now his army is heavily focused around his Reaver jet bikes. Through a combination of combat drug shenanigans, every single one of those jet bikes is toughness 5, which against my army isn't too bad because Lasguns are still wounding them on 5s, but it does mean that against things like Marines and some of my heavy weapons, instead of me wounding those bikes on 2s with like my missile launchers and my las cannons, and wound them on 2s with all my plasma. I've got loads of plasma and melter in the army. It means I only wound them on 3s. So it doesn't really affect my small arms, but it massively affects my big guns shooting those bikes because they're all toughness 5. He then has, whilst they are the core of the army and they do a lot of the damage and they draw a lot of the attention, they're also a big distraction because actually one of the biggest hitters in Johnny's army are his infantry, especially his combat characters and his basic witch squads. Each one of those basic witch squads, with the way Johnny builds them, I think each model is getting 4 to 5 attacks each. It's mad. It's really, really powerful. And then he has 4. In each squad he's got 4 guys with just basic witch weapons. That gives them loads of extra attacks. And then he also essentially has a pair of lightning claws in each squad as well. But except those lightning claws are only AP-1, but they give you +1 strength. So, long story short, just from a single 5-man squad, he's able to get in there with 20 attacks. And witches can have loads of rerolls to hit if they're near a succubus. And they get, they're all strength 4, strength 5 due to the combat drugs that he has. They've got loads of attacks. So, they're actually almost, whilst when you see the big fist of the biker squads coming in, it's actually the hidden sort of stiletto dagger of the witch infantry that actually tends to surprisingly clear you off a lot of objectives. And those witches also are very difficult to fall back from. If you want to fall back from a witch squad, you basically have to have a dice off, and they have some bonuses to their side. So it is actually quite difficult to fall back from them. So if those infantry get in, they start tying you up, and you can't get out. You can't do the classic fall back and shoot trick onto them because they're tying you up. So I knew all that going in, but I didn't change. I did change my army list very slightly, but it was in no way to tailor against Johnny's army whatsoever. In fact, I think in some ways it's very much an equal trade. So the last battle that we had been before the 9th edition points had released. So we'd done 1750 points of 8th edition points, and when that came over to 9th edition points, what we realised is Johnny's list was actually about 2030 points, and mine was about 1900. So I had 100 points left over, and I also wanted to try something different than having the exact same army in a battle report. So what I did is I dropped the Ogrins, which are a fluff choice anyway, and instead, between the Ogrin points and the 100 points I had spare anyway, I was actually able to afford 15 Scions with a Tempesta Prime. So I had, at the beginning of 9th edition, been under the impression that you know, Guard are going to be absolutely screwed because they don't start with too many CP. Now, into 9th edition a bit more, I'm starting to see it in my own battles, and I'm starting to see it a lot in other people's battles, that actually spending a boatload of CP on different detachments pre-game in 9th edition is actually really powerful, and having the ability to soup, and even with a very, very mild soup like this, which was Scions and Guard, having the ability to soup is really strong, and actually shouldn't be underestimated at all. So that was you know, Johnny's list had changed a little bit. He'd had to swap some disintegrators out for some Darklands. He'd had to mix up his character loadout a little bit, and he took a different cult because his last time we played, his cult ability didn't really come into effect. And my changes from my lessons were, you know, drop the Ogrins because they're a bit too much of a fluff unit at the moment. And instead I took, you know, some Scions to give me a bit more mobility. So that was it. That's the lessons. That was the difference in, you know, the two armies facing off against each other. Then obviously the battle played out. Now going into the battle, my plan, I've learned that basically I looked at the mission, and I was like, right, there's two objectives in my deployment zone. I want to form 2 castles on those objectives. Okay? And I just want to hold 2 primary objectives all game, because that will get me 10 points every single turn. And that is almost maxed out primary. I then want to basically contest a 3rd objective and put pressure on one flank with a little bit of a push, because I want to be able to, you know, raise 3 banners and get lots of, you know, raise the banner points. But really, I'm happy just to get 10 raise the banner points. If all I have is 2 banners that I just sit on and I just raise on 2 banners all game, I'm happy to get 10 raise the banner points. I went for engaged off fronts because I thought if I'm going to hold 2 table quarters in my deployment zone, I'll be able to push up into a 3rd one and just hold that middle ground. I never wanted to go past the middle point of the battlefield. I didn't want to push into my opponent's deployment zone, which is totally different to how I played it in the first game. In the first game, when I was going in with my 8th edition mindset, I was very much like push, 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 smash, smash, smash. That lost me the game because my lines fractured and broke. I wasn't able to protect my characters, and the Dark Elf took advantage of that, and they maxed out assassinate points against me. This game, I put everything I could into denying my opponent as many secondaries as possible, and I tried to do as well as I could on the primary game. Okay? So, formed 2 big impenetrable castles. I actually loaded up more on the left-hand side initially, because that's where I saw Johnny was loading up. Johnny actually put, I'd say, about 75% of his force on what was my left-hand flank. He had both raiders with 20 witches in them. He had a succubus and he had a plane, a razor-wing jet fighter, and he had 2 big bike squads. That's a lot of his army on one flank. Seeing that, I loaded up that flank as well, and I deployed, I'd say probably out of my 120 line infantry, I deployed about 70 to 80 on that left flank, and then backed them up with the Bullgrins. So I actually deployed my Bullgrins last because I wanted to know where Johnny was going to load up, and if he was going to load up on the left flank, I put my Bullgrins there, and if he was going to load up on the right flank, I was going to put my Bullgrins there. As it is, the Bullgrins were in the perfect position to just support the castle that was under the most pressure. On the right hand flank, I actually just put about 60 infantry. 50 infantry, sorry, I put about 50 infantry and some characters. And then I thought, you know what, I'll put my mortars over there, because I didn't want my mortars in on the left hand flank because they would just get targeted and shredded by the bikes. As it was, I was just able to leave my mortars in a mortar pit, and one squad did die eventually, but those mortars just rained down shells, killing off a bike or 2 every single turn, or shredding some infantry every turn. So that was my deployment plan. I thought, with my reserves, I have veterans and I have scions. I learned from the last game there's no point in deploying veterans on the board, even if they're protected by a Bullgrin shield of wall of meat. They just get killed. So instead, I deployed all my plasma, all my significant plasma assets and heavy weapons were deployed off the board. That was to protect them. And I thought, whichever flank Johnny decides to really push on and starts breaking through on, I'll bring my veterans over, I'll bring my scions there to secure it. So that's what my reserves were there for. And I wanted to basically hold 2 castles, push on to a middle objective, and use my reserves to contain any Dark Elder breakthrough. And that was my plan. Now, and that was, whether I was facing Blood Angels or Dark Elder or Tau or anything else, whatever it was, that was the plan that I had formulated, no matter the mission. That was, I wanted to hold 2 objectives, contest a 3rd, not go into the enemy's deployment zone, use my reserve, form 2 castles, use my reserves to secure any enemy breakthroughs. That was my plan when I was putting the army list together. And it didn't matter what army Johnny turned up with. Could have even been Imperial Knights, which would have been a really tough fight for me. It didn't matter what army he turned up with. That was my battle plan that I wanted to execute. As it was, he came with. We discussed it the night before. He had Dark Elder, so that was fine. But I knew that this weekend we were going to do a battle report. I didn't know what I was going to be facing, but I knew I wanted to use my guard, and I knew I wanted to put the lessons that I have learned over the last few months of 9th edition into practice. Long story short, guys, I executed the plan, and it worked. And if there's one thing that we take away from this after-action report, well, I know it seems a bit weird because I'm kind of like, oh, you're describing what happened in the game. No, I'm not. What I'm trying to get at here, guys, and sort of hope the lesson that you guys can learn and take away from my battlefield experience was, I'm describing what I wanted to happen in the game and what I planned for. And then everything I've talked about now, that actually planned out, and that actually panned out in the game. That actually is what took place. But that is what I had planned for from the beginning, and I stuck to my plan. Like any good Mordian Iron Guardsman, I had my orders and I stuck to my orders as best as I possibly could. And that is the key lesson I think you want to take away for Imperial Guard going into 9th edition. If you're getting your first few games under your belt, build your army with a plan in mind. Doesn't matter what mission you go into, just go, this army is built to do this thing, and it will execute that thing, and then it will win. And that's what you want to do. Now, I still made some mistakes. I dropped 7 victory points that game through pure incompetence. I make no bones about it. I could have got 2 more engagement front points. I could have maxed out primary. I could have got 45 primary. I didn't, but that's my own mistake. Other things that I learned. So I'm not going to talk about what happened in the battle report too much, because obviously I want you to go and watch it. I've talked about what my plan was and how that plan basically played out how I wanted it to. A couple of big lessons though, okay, which is what I've noticed time and what is becoming clearer and clearer to me now is that all the in my army there's two weapons that stand out. There's plasma and there's lasguns. I have lots of other weapons. I have flamers, I have melters, I have grenade launchers, I have some missile launchers, and I have a las cannon. But all the heavy lifting in my army is done by those two weapons. Okay? And I have about an equal amount of plasma to sort of melter to flamer. You know, I've got it's maybe slightly more leaning on the plasma, but it's, you know, I've got I've got about an equal amount of special weapons. And what I'm noticing with this pure infantry army is my heavy weapons aren't really doing that much for me, although to be fair I'm not taking that many of them. But what is consistently doing work is my plasma and my lasguns. Because my plasma kills the big things. And my lasguns kill the enemy light infantry. Now, when I'm facing an army like Dark Elder, that means I've got the tools to deal with both. Plasma to deal with bikes, like lasguns to deal with light infantry and vehicle, you know, and Dark Elder light vehicles. But even if I was to go into something again like Marines obviously a tough fight. You know, you're fighting an uphill battle no matter what. But one thing I would say is if I swapped out all my other heavy weapons and special weapons and just took plasma and lasguns, I think even when I turn up against the Marine army, I'm going to have enough plasma to deal the majority of the damage. And thanks to having an 18-inch rapid fire and basically, you know, having 4 shots per lasgun, yes, it will take a lot of lasguns to do it, and I will need some astropaths as well. But I do think that I would have enough lasguns not to do a huge amount of damage, but enough lasguns to just chip off the last wound here and there. Because that's what I was finding with the bikes. What I was finding when I was facing those bikes down is if I killed, let's say I killed 5 bikes from the squad, 3.5, 4 of those bikes would be killed by plasma. I'd say about 3.5 of the bikes would be killed by plasma. The other bike and a half would be plinked off by lasguns. And even though I was rolling a lot more lasgun dice than plasma dice, I still valued my lasguns. And now I think some of you are going to be saying, but hang on, Morning Glory, you said recently that you thought lasguns were useless. I think a few lasguns are useless. I think just a few. I think if you're committing to a pure, I think if you're not going pure infantry out, I think your lasguns are essentially useless. I think if you are going pure infantry, I think it's possible to bring enough of them where they actually do what they need to do, which is just chip off a few wounds here and there against elite infantry armies. Now, against anything like Custodes or anything with 2+ save, I don't think it's going to help, unfortunately, because lasguns really struggle to deal with anything with a 2+ save. But anything marine related with a 3+ save, I think lasguns, if you can just force enough 3+ saves, it's okay. You'll chip off the occasional one here and there. But the big winners that I took away from that game in terms of weapons was my plasma guns. I think plasma's still on the menu, and I know there'll be a lot of people saying, well, what about those new marine intercessors, the heavy intercessors with 3 wounds each? I know, guys, but I still think you need those flat 2 damage weapons, and hopefully, you know, auto cannons will go up to damage 3. If that's the case, I'll be taking a lot of them. Melter's good, obviously, but I still think plasma is king in a pure infantry army. So that's what I learned loadout wise. Last thing I would say, just a bit of fun at the end of the video. My God, did I love my Stormtroopers that game. That game, my Stormtroopers they won me the game. Hands down. That little detachment of Stormtroopers dropped in turn 3 because I was just holding on. And they dropped in turn 3. They eliminated Drozar and a couple of bikes. Drozar was 3 points. Ease to that was 3 assassinate points. Every bike that I killed at that crucial point in the game was big. It slowed Johnny's momentum down. And then turn 4, they crippled the remaining bikes. I thought Johnny had loads left, but after dust settled, he only had 5 bikes left on turn 4. It's not a lot. And then they cut down another bike and a half in combat. Amazing. Or 2 bikes in combat because one was already wounded, thanks to land and line AP -1. Then they fell back and they were able to eliminate the succubus, which was 3 points to me and denied Johnny 7 points. It was a 10-point swing. So in total, those little 15 Scions and Tempesta Prime, those 16 Stormtroopers of the Assault Corps caused 13 point. They affected 13 victory points. Oh, sorry, and they got me an extra point for engage on all fronts because they managed to get me into the table quarter. So it's actually 4. So that's actually 14 points. So really, you know, really good job, those Stormtroopers. Really, really good job. So 14-point swing, thanks to those guys. Absolutely loved them. Really, really, and the melters did really well. The good thing about a melter gun is when it punches through, it tends to do a lot of damage. It's really powerful. I've started, you know, as much as I do love plasma, but I think melter is going to get very, you know, I think if Games Workshop continues with making loads of infantry be a minimum of 3 wounds, like Marines and stuff, I think melter may start becoming equal or superior to plasma, but we're not quite there yet. We're getting close, but not quite there yet. Anyway, guys, this video has gone on a bit longer than I expected it to. Thought it'd be a quick 10-minuter, but I hope it's been useful. I hope it has allowed you to sort of peer into what was going on in my brain during that battle. And I hope you saw in action everything that we've been talking about, you know, in the comment sections, on the videos, everything that we've been talking about over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks about focusing on certain types of objectives, going in with a plan, building your army in a certain way, what weapon loadouts worked, adding, you know, taking advantage of being able to take multiple detachments still. You know, I think, you know, I hope you could see that in the battle, and I hope it's come across clearly in this after action report. Anyway, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and of course, I'll see you guys next time.